Hello, and thank you for tuning in to Starting Small. Today, I'm joined by Priyanka Jain of Evvy. Priyanka, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm very excited for our conversation.
Yeah, so to kick things off, I'd like to start out with your upbringing. Where did you grow up, and what do you say your childhood was like?
Wow, what a big question. I grew up in Seattle, Washington, so on the West Coast. I now live in New York, so very different.
Mhm.
But grew up with a big family. I have two brothers, an older brother and a younger brother, and grew up in a family of entrepreneurs. So really was always kind of surrounded by the idea that when you see a problem, you can go after solving it, and a lot of just amazing energy of you can do whatever you think you can, and feel very grateful to be have been brought
Mhm.
up in that environment.
Yeah, I mean, some of the listeners who might have heard that interview I mentioned before the call, I've had your dad on, but what were some of your interests growing up? I know, like, your dad was heavy in entrepreneurship, but growing up as a kid, what were your interests?
Yeah, I was always interested in specifically just like ways that we could make the world a more fair place for women. Very early days, was involved in a variety of nonprofits that were focused on creating access to education and leadership programs and healthcare and documentation for girls around the world. So, was really involved with starting the Girl Up campaign, which is part of the UN Foundation,
Wow.
was building a school for girls in Afghanistan through an amazing organization called Circle of Women. I started a nonprofit that was focused on helping young people find nonprofits in their area that were focused on a cause that they really cared about.
Mhm.
So was always really interested in ways that we could make the world a better place for women.
Yeah.
And then I think after going to Stanford and being exposed to the many ways that we could leverage technology and
Mm,
science to really accelerate impact much further,
yeah.
that was when I really landed in a career path that looks more similar to what I do today. Right,
Love it. Love
using
it.
tech and science to do the same things, but in a more efficient and scaled fashion.
For sure. So what led you to go on to study at Stanford, and what did you study there as well?
I studied I always joke it's a slightly like made up Stanford degree called Science, Technology, and Society. And it was a degree that was kind of across the engineering school, the business school, the design school,
Mhm.
sociology, anthropology. It was really trying to understand, how do you identify problems that people
Mm,
have and really understand the context in which those problems exist. How
mm.
do you then actually design good products? And then
Yeah.
how do you actually think about bringing those things to market? And it was a really honestly kind of amazing degree that took you
Mm,
through so many iterations of what it actually means to be a founder, which is really
yeah.
amazing now. But while I was there, I was involved in a bunch of different organizations. I led Stanford Women in Business. I was part of the
Mm,
Mayfield Entrepreneurship Fellowship, um, and it was just like an amazing place to foster relationships and just
yeah.
interests in so many different things.
Love it. Post-graduation, what did that look like then? I know you kinda dove into entrepreneurship a little bit more and then had some interesting roles there.
Yes, definitely. Right after school, I joined a small startup based here in New York called Pymetrics, and we were
Mhm.
focused on building algorithms that could help remove bias from the hiring process, kind of with
Mm,
the initial idea that obviously the resume is not a very predictive or fair tool, right?
yeah.
Looking at what you've done in the past or what you've had access to do in the past is
Mm,
not necessarily a predictor of what you're capable of doing in the future. And so instead, we use neuroscience assessments to better match people to jobs where they are highly likely to succeed.
mm,
And it was an amazing journey. I was there for over 4 years and led product there. So
mm,
oversaw everything from how we built our algorithms to the product and kind of experiences that we built around that for both our companies as well as candidates.
mm,
Um, and then got to lead a lot of these really amazing relationships with Fortune 500 companies that were willing to kind of rethink the way that hiring was done.
yeah.
I was there from when we were around maybe 10 people to when we were around 150 people,
Wow.
and raised over $70 million and worked
Wow.
with a lot of the largest employers, which was a really amazing experience.
That's incredible. I mean, starting out at that startup, we'll dive into that a little bit more, but what was that like onboarding some of those, I would say, Fortune 500 companies at that startup level, joining at the founding level?
Totally. I mean, it's wild. It's so funny when you're a tiny company working with one of the largest companies in the world, right? You learn
Yeah.
very quickly how different you operate. But I think in so many ways, it's such a gift to be able to show them how quickly they can change the ways that they're doing things. I think we learned a lot about, their processes you have to follow. We had to have really strong data security. We had to prove, go
Mm.
through so many extra steps to prove that what we were doing was fair and unbiased. And,
Mm.
it was just like you have to meet a really high bar in many ways to work with those types of customers. But then
Yeah.
once you prove that you're able to do that, the scale of people whose lives you're able to impact so
Mm.
quickly is remarkable, right?
Yeah.
You're able to access hundreds of thousands of people who then are able to
Mm.
benefit from the service you
Yeah.
have to offer. So I would say it's like high barrier to entry, but then
For
very much
sure.
high reward.
For sure. During this time, when did the idea of Evvy come out? Were you currently at the startup at the same time, or I'd love to get into that.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, I always joke that I was like a patient of the healthcare system one too many times. I think, I
Mm.
just have been a woman who's had to go through the healthcare system with a variety of my own challenges for so long, and just like cannot believe how frustrating the whole process and experience continues to be in
Mm.
2024, right? And this was in 2020.
Yeah.
But during COVID, I think I had been dealing with a variety of my own health challenges and feel like no matter which doctor I went to, the specialist of the specialist, the person who was going to help me
Mm.
figure out what was going on, it was always, oh, maybe you're stressed, or maybe you should drink more water, or maybe you should sleep more. And it was this
Mm.
really frustrating kind of set of responses. And these are really amazing, well meaning doctors, but they just did not
Mm.
have the tools to help me better understand what was going
Yeah.
on. And as I started to do some of my own research, as I think so many women end up doing, in these journeys, that was when I found out that women weren't in clinical research in the US until
Mm.
1993, and that to
Wow.
this day, we are diagnosed 4 years later than men on average across over 700 diseases. And that was when I
Wow.
realized, oh, wow, okay, there's actually a massive data gap when it comes to our understanding of the female body, right? And I had just spent
Yeah.
4 years showing how you can leverage data to find new insights and
Mm.
so much more predictive. And I was like, how is it possible that we're missing all of this data on the female body,
Yeah.
right? Essentially, all of the ways that we measure if somebody is healthy or sick is based on whatever was predictive of health and disease in middle-aged, mid-sized white men, right?
Yeah.
And then we
Yeah.
kind of like made everything smaller and assumed it would work for women. And I think here
Yep.
we are in a healthcare system that doesn't work for us. And so I was
Mm.
really curious about, what if we paid attention to the signals that the female body is uniquely giving off, right? They're probably constantly trying to tell us, I'm doing really well, or I need help here, but we aren't picking up on those signals because we've never studied them, right? And so
Yeah.
the initial hypothesis was that there were so many signals that we could do a better job measuring and tracking that could help us to
Mm.
improve our ability to predict risk of disease, diagnose
Mm.
disease, or treat disease as it uniquely manifests in female bodies.
Yeah. Incredible. So I actually was a part of a founding team with Maria Shriver, and the same thing translated because we
Yeah.
focused on brain health. You might have
Yes.
heard, maybe Mosh, but the same data correlates where it's 2/3 of all Alzheimer's cases are female. Um, I would love to dive in.
Yeah.
What was that process like working maybe with doctors on creating the first prototype of that test? What that looked
Yeah.
like?
Totally. Well, I mean, I think initially it's like, why did we even choose to start with the vaginal microbiome, right?
Yeah.
As we were kind of looking at what are the markers that have the highest potential to improve outcomes, but have been the most overlooked, I feel like the vaginal microbiome is just at the top of that list, where
Mm.
on one hand, not only is vaginal discomfort the leading reason that women seek healthcare advice in the US, highly, highly prevalent, 30% of women at any given time have just one of the many vaginal infections. But unfortunately, when we go to the doctor, we are more likely to be misdiagnosed and not get better than we
Mm.
are for the opposite of those things to happen, right? So there's
Yeah.
this like very clear need from a patient and clinical standpoint for better testing and better treatment.
Mm.
And then on the flip side, there's so much research showing that what's going on in the vaginal microbiome then plays a role in so many other female health outcomes.
Yeah.
Everything from IVF success rates to natural fertility to preterm birth rates to cervical cancer progression to STI acquisition.
Mm.
And it just blew my mind that for, again, something that is the leading reason that women go to the doctor and could help us improve outcomes and reduce costs in all of these really high impact areas, how did we not have the robust data to start to
Mm.
actually leverage this biomarker, right? And
Yeah.
so that was something that really came through in talking to both researchers, doctors, and patients. It was like a very universal opportunity.
Yeah.
And then the next challenge was like, okay, now that we know that we want to focus on the vaginal microbiome, how do you actually bring these novel sequencing technologies to this problem in the clinic, right? How do we make this
Mm,
clinically accessible? Meaning it has to be a clinical grade test, it has to be physician ordered and physician reviewed. And that process was, it was really hard. It was really hard
yeah.
to kind of stand that up, find the right lab partners, validate the test, figure out how you optimize the wet lab and the bioinformatics, and actually then get it in the hands of patients and providers.
Yeah. I mean, during that time, I mean, 2020, 2021, I think that's a critical time as well. What was that like? What was the founding team like, especially too? I mean, who are you working with?
Yeah, definitely. So I have two amazing co-founders. One is Lane Bruzak, who's my co-founder and chief marketing officer. She oversees everything we do that's consumer facing, our brand, our social, our growth strategy, all of that. And she's done just a phenomenal job building
Mm,
Evvy as, you know, a leading brand in the women's health space that's based in science and data, and really kind of like destigmatizing and demystifying all of these women's health conditions while also doing so from a very scientifically sound lens.
yeah.
And then my other co-founder is Peta Navarro, who is our chief science officer and who oversees everything we do across research and the clinical side of
Mm,
Evvy. So we very much have a phenomenal team.
yeah.
And then obviously we were very lucky to have an amazing team of medical and scientific advisors who helped us
Mm,
bring the tests to life and interpret the test results and build out that experience, but then also
mm,
help us set up our actual care delivery protocols, right? So now we
yeah.
also do end-to-end care delivery, and so helped us actually design what those treatment protocols look like and how we deliver them to patients at home.
Yeah. Oh, that's incredible. At launch, did you guys do a fundraising round? What did that look like for capital up front?
Yeah, great question. So we bootstrapped until we
Mm,
had a first version of the product. So it was just the three of us, and we did as much as we could ourselves to kind of get the first version of the product up and running. And then right after we launched, I want to say we launched the second week of July in 2021, and that was also when we raised our seed round. And so we
mm,
raised a $5 million seed round that was led by General Catalyst, and that really allowed us to like hire and invest in growing the product and
yeah.
advertising and all of that.
Yeah. What did you find launching at that time for like the growth of the company? What especially an at-home customized test for females. I feel like that was actually a really good time to launch. What did you guys find?
Yeah, I mean, I think that for so many reasons, I mean, I have so much to say about this. I think that
Yeah.
at the end of the day, I think so many women's health area there's so many needs in women's health that have been so poorly served by the system as it's set up today. And I
Mm,
think those are areas where people are highly interested in novel solutions. And I think vaginal health is at the top of that list, right? As
mm,
I said to you before, leading reason that women seek healthcare advice, they're getting not getting better more than they're getting better. And what does that mean? Those people are turning to the internet, right? They're
yeah.
turning to Reddit. They're looking for new solutions. Unfortunately, before Evvy, they were being hit by ads for any type of product that makes your vagina smell like a flower because
Mm,
the healthcare system had failed all these patients and there weren't better solutions. But because of that, it meant that there was already a captive audience that was already spending money on this problem, but had never had access to information or data before. And so when
yeah.
we came into the market saying, actually, we can give you answers, we can tell you what's going on, we can
Mm,
give you the information on your body that you've been looking for this whole time, I think there was a very receptive audience, both from an advertising standpoint, but also
mm,
really from an organic standpoint. And to this day, our revenue is primarily driven organically
mm,
through content that we put out. I mean, we have an amazing blog, an amazing TikTok, an amazing Instagram, but then also through all of these online communities where women were
mm,
already going to talk about these problems, but they just never had tools to actually inform what was going on
yeah.
before Evvy.
For sure. What does that look like? That experience. So after the test, and do they send it back in? What does that user experience look like?
Yeah, great question. So, patients order the test online. They take it
Mhm,
at home. It's like a simple Q-tip swab. They mail it back to our lab. Our lab then does metagenomic whole genome sequencing, where we're able to look for all bacteria and fungi that have ever been isolated from the
mm,
urogenital tract, one swab. We then ingest all of that data. We combine it with, your health profile data, right? The symptoms you're experiencing, if you're pregnant, if you're in menopause, what birth control you're on. And we then synthesize that into what I, in my biased opinion, believe is an amazing educational experience around
Mm,
everything that we found in your microbiome, how it's related to your health goals, and then most importantly, a plan of exactly what to do next. Here are conversations to have with your
mm,
partner. Here are conversations to have with your doctor. Here are potential treatments to look into that have been shown to be effective on the specific things we found in your microbiome. And you can
mm,
either take that to your own doctor, or you can actually find a doctor through Evvy who's then able to prescribe custom compounded
mm,
treatment based on exactly what we see in your vaginal microbiome and the data that
mm.
we now have on how the vaginal microbiome can be modulated.
Yeah, that's incredible. So the expansion to your doctors in house was that later on in Evvy's launch, or what time period was that?
Yeah, great question. We launched that, I want to say, about a year and a half after the test. So we started with the
Yeah.
test only. And unfortunately, what we found was that so many patients came back to us saying, I don't have a doctor. My doctor can't see me for 3 months. My doctor
Mm,
keeps telling me it's in my head. And as much as we wanted to just say, there's so many amazing providers out there, like take this
mm.
to your own doctor, I think what we found was that that was not the reality that so many women were experiencing. And we
Yeah.
had to make it possible for people to find a provider through Evvy and to actually get the care that they needed. And I think
Mm,
obviously we saw this during COVID, where giving people access to care online really expands access to a much wider population, right? I think in the US
yeah.
today, 50% of counties still don't have an OBGYN. And so I think
Mm,
that what we realized is that in order to actually improve outcomes, we also had to enable access to care.
yeah. As you mentioned, most of the growth to date has been organic. I would love to hear what marketing do you find that works well? I know you dive deep into education, especially with the blog as well. Love to hear.
Yeah. I mean, I really think that our primary marketing strategy has been education. It really just
Yeah.
has been explaining, 66% of people who think they have a yeast infection actually have something else. What are the differences between symptoms that you might have from a yeast infection versus an STI? Or
Mm,
I mean, the questions that people have that have just never been answered before, right? And what you find is
yeah.
that where do people go with, somewhat embarrassing questions? They go to Google, right? And so if you can
Mm,
actually provide them with medically reviewed, scientifically accurate content that answers the questions people have, you actually bring a lot of people in the door. And
yeah.
I would say in addition to education, our other main strategy has really been around kind of humor and destigmatization. So really
Mm,
thinking about, like, these are topics that affect the majority of women, and yet most people have never heard about them in public,
yeah.
right? They've never seen content about it online. And so I think
Yeah.
having kind of like funny TikTok videos where we're able to actually like laugh about these conditions that we all
Mm,
deal with, I think has just the right amount of like shock factor and
yeah.
relatability that really drives kind of virality. And so I think between kind of actually providing people with answers and content, along with like humor and destigmatization, has been like very successful for our brand
Yeah.
overall.
With some of that feedback, consumer feedback, what would you find is the main demographic overall? Of course, females, but is there a specific age range you've been seeing? I'm curious.
Yeah, such a good question. We actually see a really wide age range, like truly 18, because that's the youngest you can be, to literally 85.
Yeah.
We see it all. We have patients in nursing homes, we have patients in college. I would say that the primary defining factor of our customers is that they have some reason that they're interested in their vaginal microbiome, right? Like
Mm,
obvious one being that they've had recurrent symptoms or recurrent infections, but other ones being that they're thinking about getting pregnant or they've had trouble getting pregnant and they know that the vaginal microbiome might play a role.
mm,
So I would say it's more people that are interested in their vaginal microbiome for some reason, more so
yeah.
than any kind of demographic factor, if that makes
Yeah.
sense.
Yeah, that makes sense. Something I'd like to dive into. I know you also created a day, which is incredible, Equal Research Day. If we can dive into that, like what was that process like and the inspo behind that as well?
Yeah, such a great question. I mean, as you heard from the very beginning, right, our mission at Evvy has always been bigger than just the vaginal microbiome, but we spend most of our time thinking and working on the vaginal microbiome. And we always
Mhm.
say Equal Research Day is the time of the year that we get to zoom out and think about kind of the macro problem that we exist within, which is that
Mm,
generally women's health research has been so radically underfunded in the US.
mm,
And so Equal Research Day itself falls on June 10th every year. And June 10th is the anniversary of the NIH Revitalization Act, which was passed
Mm.
on June 10th, 1993, which is
Wow.
when women were first required to be in clinical research. And so
Mm.
we kind of bring up that day as a reminder of like, it's only been 30 years that women have actually been in research. And to this day,
Mm.
there's still so many challenges when it comes to funding of research on women's health issues, as well as
Mm.
inclusion and equal representation of women in the trials for drugs and conditions that disproportionately affect us.
Yeah.
And what's so amazing about Equal Research Day is that we're able to bring together the broader women's health community. So this year, I want to say we did it in partnership with 50 other women's health companies. We're able to
Mm.
bring together nonprofits, policy leaders, and really kind of think across sectors. How can we work together to
Yeah.
really solve this problem?
It's incredible. I like to conclude each episode here. If we can share one piece of advice with an aspiring entrepreneur, maybe something you've learned or regret along the way, what would you say that would be?
Such a good question. I think one, hmm, well, I think I'll say one just comment and then I'll give a piece of advice. I think my comment is that
Yeah.
everything is hard. I think that like if you are trying to build something or you're in the process of it and you feel like it's hard, I think that's just true for everyone.
Mm.
You only see the highlight reel, but like truly every single thing we do at Evvy is 10 times harder than I think it's going to be.
Mm.
So I just hope that gives somebody solace who's going through it, that it's like no matter what it looks like on the outside, it's so hard.
Mm.
And then the piece of advice I would have is that people love to ask me, like, are you a doctor? Are you a PhD? And I think, like, it took me a long time to feel like I could just confidently say, like, no, I am none of those things. I am a patient who believes that I can use my skills and resources to pull together people who can solve this problem. But
Mm.
I don't need to be the doctor or the PhD to
Yeah.
be the rallying cry to make that happen. Right. And I think
Mm.
being confident in what you do bring to the table and being willing to point to the areas where you need experts and then bringing them in house is actually like we need way more people to do that, right? We need
Mm.
people to be willing to go and step into areas where they're not experts and say, why is it this way?
Yeah.
Why can't it be better? And then you don't have to be the expert. You just need to find those people to be on your team, right? I think
Yeah.
now we are surrounded by phenomenal doctors, phenomenal scientists. And who knows if those people would have focused on the vaginal microbiome if we hadn't
Mm.
decided to start
Yeah.
Evvy, right?
For
And so I
sure.
think just having the confidence that you don't have to have the degree to be
Mm.
able to pull together people to solve a problem is something that I wish I felt
Yeah.
4 years ago.
Love it. Well, Priyanka, thank you so much for taking the time. And to the listeners out there, make sure to check out Evvy at evvy.com.